Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the stars disappear. One by one, they went dark as massive shapes moved across the sky. The alien ships were so big they blocked out the light from distant suns. "Sir, we have incoming transmission," said Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her station. Her hands shook as she worked at the controls. "It's coming from the lead ship." Jake nodded. "Put it on screen." The main display flickered. A creature appeared. That looked nothing like any human. It had 4 arms, gray skin like stone, and eyes that glowed red. When it spoke, the voice was cold and hard. "I am War Commander Thexval of the Zelkari Empire. Your species will surrender now. You have 1 of your hours to decide. Resistance is pointless. We have conquered 847 worlds. Your primitive weapons cannot harm us." The transmission ended. The bridge went quiet. Jake looked around at his crew. They were all young, all scared. Earth's best and brightest, but they had never faced anything like this. "How many ships?" Jake asked. 300, Amy said. "Maybe more. Each one is 10 times bigger than our largest vessel." Admiral Carl Bennett's voice came through the communication system from Earth Command. "All ships. This is Bennett. We knew this day might come. Every defense fleet in the system is now under Captain Morrison's command. Make humanity proud." Jake felt the weight of the entire human race on his shoulders. Through the window, he could see Earth in the distance. Blue and green and beautiful. Home to 8 billion people who had no idea their world was about to change forever. Dr. Helen Carter was in the war room deep underground in Colorado. She studied the data her computers were showing her. The numbers were not good. Not good at all. The Zelkari have never lost a battle, she told the generals around the table. Not once in over 1,000 years. They show up, they demand surrender, and within 3 days every world gives up. The longest anyone ever held out was 72 hours. General Frank Williams looked at the screens showing the alien fleet. "What makes them so good at this?" "They don't just have better weapons," Helen said. "They have a system. They study each world for months before they attack. They know exactly how much force to use. Just enough to show they cannot be beaten, but not so much that they destroy what they want to take." "And what do they want?" Williams asked. "Everything. They take the smartest people to work for them. They take the strongest to be soldiers. Everyone else becomes a worker. They strip the planet of anything useful and move on." Back in space, Jake was getting reports from his captains. Commander Ryan Torres was leading the fighter squadrons. His voice crackled over the radio. "Jake, they're launching scout ships. Small ones, but they're fast. Should we engage?" Jake thought for a moment. The smart thing would be to wait, save their strength. But he knew his people needed to see their military doing something. Anything. "Take them out, Ryan. Show them we're not going down without a fight." The human fighters were tiny compared to the alien scouts, but they were quick. Ryan led his squadron through the asteroid belt, using the rocks for cover. The Zelkari ships moved in perfect formation, following patterns that seemed almost like a dance. "They fight like machines," Ryan said over the radio. "Everything planned out, no surprises." The first battle was short. The human fighters destroyed 3 Zelkari scouts, but lost 12 of their own ships. It was not a good trade, but Jake felt proud anyway. His people had drawn first blood. On the Zelkari command ship, War Commander Thexval watched the battle with interest. Most species tried to hide when his scouts appeared. These humans attacked instead. It was stupid, but also unexpected. "Sub-Commander Crixa, what is your analysis?" Thexval asked. "Their tactics make no sense," Crixa replied. "They sacrificed 12 ships to destroy 3. Any logical species would preserve their forces." "Perhaps they are not logical," Thexval said. "Number. Matter. Begin the bombardment of their military installations. Standard procedure. They will surrender when they see the true power of the Empire." The Zelkari ships opened fire. Beams of energy shot down from space, destroying military bases all over Earth. The attacks were precise, powerful, and meant to terrify. Cities were left alone for now. This was just a demonstration. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez watched the destruction from space. Tears ran down her face as she saw the bases where she had trained disappear in balls of fire. "Sir," she said to Jake, "they're targeting our communication centers too." "They want to cut us off from each other," Jake nodded. He had expected this. "Switch to emergency frequencies. Get me every ship captain, every base commander, every leader still alive." The communication came through filled with static. Voices from all over Earth and from ships throughout the solar system. Jake took a deep breath. "This is Captain Morrison. I know you're all scared. I'm scared too. The enemy is stronger than the U.S. They have better weapons, bigger ships, more experience. Every smart person says we should surrender." He paused, looking out at Earth again. "But I've been thinking about my daughter. She's 7 years old. She draws pictures of spaceships and dreams of visiting other worlds. If we surrender, she never get that chance. None of our children will. They'll grow up as slaves." His voice got stronger. "So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fight. Not because we can win, but because it's right. Because freedom is worth more than safety. Because we're human and humans don't give up." The voices that answered him were full of determination. Down on Earth, the evacuation had begun. Millions of people fled the cities, heading for mountains and forests and underground shelters, but not everyone ran. Some stayed to fight. Maria Gonzalez was a school teacher in Texas. When the alien ships appeared, she could have fled with her students. Instead, she helped organize the town's defense. She had never held a gun before, but she learned quickly. "Why are you staying?" asked Steve Clark, the local mechanic. "You could be safe in the mountains." Maria looked up at the alien ships in the sky. "Because someone has to teach these monsters that humans are not easy prey." The hour was almost up. War Commander Thexville waited for the surrender message that always came. On 847 worlds, the pattern had been the same. Show of force, demand surrender, accept submission. Simple and clean, but no message came from Earth. Instead, Jake Morrison sent a reply that would echo through the galaxy. War Commander Thexville, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. We have received your demand for surrender. Here is our answer. No, come and take us if you can. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Zelkari Empire had been told no. The war for Earth's freedom was about to begin. 3 weeks had passed since the war began. War Commander Thexville stood in his command room, staring at reports that made no sense. The humans should have surrendered by now. Every other species had given up after the first bombardment. Subcommander Crixa, explain these casualty numbers, Thexville said. Crixa looked uncomfortable. Sir, we have lost 67 ground units and 15 ships. The humans refuse to engage us in proper battle. They hide, attack, and run away. Show me, Thexville ordered. The screen displayed images from Earth in the ruins of Chicago. Colonel Lisa Kane led a group of human fighters through broken buildings. They wore no uniforms and carried simple weapons. When Zelkari soldiers marched down the street, the humans attacked from windows and rooftops, then disappeared into the rubble. They fight like wild animals, Crixa said. No formation, no strategy? We can predict. Lisa Kane crouched behind a destroyed car, watching Zelkari troops search the area. She had been a military police officer before the war. Now she was learning to be something else entirely. Remember, she whispered to her team, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to make them pay for every step they take. 1. Of her fighters, a teenager named Bobby, who used to work at a fast food restaurant, pointed to a Zelkari patrol. There, just like you taught us, they had placed explosives in the street. When the alien soldiers walked over them, Lisa pressed the button. The explosion killed 3 Zelkari and wounded 5 more. Before the aliens could react, the humans were gone. In space, Captain Ben Davis was having his own kind of success. His ship used to carry grain from farms to cities. Now it carried missiles and desperate hope. Captain, said his communications officer, a woman named Carol who used to sell insurance, We have 5 Zelkari supply ships moving through Sector 7. Good, Ben said. Remember, we're not military. We don't follow their rules. Ben's plan was simple and crazy. His cargo ship looked harmless, so the Zelkari would not expect an attack. He would fly close, pretend to surrender, then ram the enemy ships at full speed. It worked. The explosion destroyed 2 Zelkari supply vessels and damaged a third. NCU. Ship was lost, but his crew escaped in pods that other human ships picked up. That's the 5th supply convoy we've hit this week, Ben said as he floated in the rescue pod. They can't protect everything. War Commander Thexville was growing frustrated. These humans make no sense. They sacrifice valuable ships for minor tactical gains? Any civilized species would preserve their resources. What the Zelkari did not understand was that humans had already accepted they would lose. They were not trying to win. They were trying to make the victory as expensive as possible. Dr. Patricia Stone worked in a hidden laboratory beneath the ruins of Denver. She had been studying captured Zelkari equipment for 2 weeks. What she found surprised her. Their technology is amazing, she told her team, but it's also predictable. Everything follows the same patterns. They never change or adapt. She had discovered that Zelkari weapons had built-in safety features to prevent them from being used by other species. But Patricia was clever. She figured out how to remove those features and attach the alien power sources to human weapons. It's like taking the engine from a race car and putting it in a truck, she explained. Not elegant, but it works. The hybrid weapons were distributed to human fighters across the globe. Suddenly, humans had guns that could actually hurt Zelkari soldiers. Sergeant Tony Martinez was training civilians in a forest outside of Atlanta. His students included a doctor, a farmer, 2 college students, and a grandmother named Ruth who had never hurt anyone in her life. The most important thing, Tony told them, is to think differently than they do. They expect us to line up and fight fair, so we don't. He taught them to use the forest itself as a weapon. Holes covered with leaves became traps. Tree branches became slingshots. Rocks became grenades when wrapped with Patricia's hybrid explosives. But Sergeant, said the doctor, a man named Pete, won't we just make them angry? Tony smiled grimly. They're already destroying our world. The only question is whether we make them work for it. Ruth, the grandmother, raised her hand. My grandson is in the space fleet. I want to help him however I can. Then let's teach you how to make these invaders sorry they ever heard of Earth. Tony said Captain Jake Morrison was still alive, though his original ship had been destroyed. He now commanded a mixed group of military vessels and converted civilian ships. They moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough for the Zelkari to find them. Status report, Jake said to his new crew. Half of them were teenagers, who had volunteered after their families were killed in the bombardments. We have 47 ships left, reported Amy Rodriguez, who had somehow survived when the Defiance was destroyed. Ammunition is low, but morale is high. Through the communication system, Jake could hear reports from resistance cells all over Earth. In Japan, civilians were using subway tunnels to launch surprise attacks. In Brazil, fighters were disappearing into the jungle after hitting Zelkari supply lines. In Africa, entire villages were evacuating before Zelkari troops arrived, leaving behind nothing but empty buildings and hidden bombs. They're calling in reinforcements, Amy said. First time in their history, Jake nodded. That was actually good news. It meant the Zelkari were scared on the Zelkari command ship. War Commander Thexville received a message from the High Command. Supreme Overlord Vexamur was not pleased. War Commander, explain why this conquest is taking longer than any in our history. The Supreme Overlord's voice was cold with anger. The humans are different. Supreme Overlord. They do not fight to win. They fight to inflict damage. All species fight when cornered. What makes these creatures special? Vexville struggled to find words. They seem to prefer death to surrender. Even when defeat is certain, they continue fighting. There was a long pause. Are you telling me that a primitive species is teaching the Zelkari Empire about warfare? No, Supreme Overlord. I'm saying they are teaching us about madness. But it was not madness. Captain Nicole Turner proved that when she led a raid on a Zelkari weapons depot. Her team included a mix of military personnel and civilians. They studied the target for 3 days, then attacked at dawn when the aliens expected them least. The depot was heavily guarded, but Nicole had learned something important about Zelkari psychology. They always followed the same defensive patterns. If you attacked from the east, they would reinforce the east. If you attacked from above, they would watch the sky. So Nicole attacked from below. Her team had spent 2 days digging tunnels. They came up inside the depot, destroyed as much equipment as they could carry, and disappeared back underground before the Zelkari knew what had happened. "How did you know that would work?" asked one of her team members, a young man named Chris who used to fix computers. "Because they think like machines," Nicole said. "Efficient, logical, predictable, but we think like humans. Crazy, desperate, and willing to try anything." The raid was a complete success. More importantly, other resistance cells heard about it and started using similar tactics. War Commander Thexville realized he was facing something his species had never encountered before. An enemy that could not be broken by superior force because they had already accepted defeat. An enemy that measured victory not by survival, but by the cost they inflicted on their conquerors. For the first time in his long military career, Thexville began to doubt. Not doubt his eventual victory, but doubt whether that victory would be worth the price. Meanwhile, in hidden bunkers and ruined cities across Earth, humans continued their impossible fight. They had no hope of winning, but they had something else. Something the Zelkari could not understand or counter. They had the absolute refusal to give up. The war had been going on for 3 months. War Commander Thexville stood before a communication screen, facing the anger of Supreme Overlord Veximer. Behind the Supreme Overlord, Thexville could see other members of the High Command. Their red eyes glowed with disapproval. "Explain to me," Veximer said slowly, "how a single primitive world has cost us more ships than the last 50 conquests combined." Thexville tried to keep his voice steady. "The humans do not follow standard patterns of resistance, Supreme Overlord. They have introduced variables we have never encountered." "Variables?" Veximer's voice grew dangerous. "We have conquered worlds with better technology. We have defeated species with superior numbers. What makes these creatures so difficult?" "They fight for concepts we do not understand," Thexville said. "They speak of freedom, honor, and protecting future generations. These ideas seem to make them stronger, not weaker, when facing certain death." Dr. Elena Brooks was hidden in an underground bunker in what used to be New York. She was not a soldier. She was a psychologist who had studied human behavior for 20 years. Now she was studying something else entirely. In front of her was a captured Zelkari soldier. The alien sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Elena had been trying to understand how the Zelkari mind worked. "Tell me about your homeworld," Elena said. "Information not relevant to military objectives," the Zelkari replied. "Do you have a family, children?" "Breeding assignments are determined by genetic efficiency protocols," Elena leaned forward. "What do you fight for?" The alien looked confused. "Fight for?" "Military units follow orders to maintain empire stability." Elena was beginning to understand. The Zelkari were not evil monsters. They were something more frightening. They were a species that had forgotten what it meant to want something more than survival and order. Captain Nicole Turner was preparing for another raid. This time, the target was a Zelkari communication center. Her team included 15 fighters, most of them people who had never been soldiers before the war. "Remember," Nicole told them, "we're not just trying to damage their equipment. We're trying to do something they can't predict." Her plan was based on something Dr. Brooks had discovered about Zelkari psychology. The aliens expected attacks to follow logical patterns. If humans wanted to destroy a communication center, the Zelkari assumed they would try to blow it up or capture it. Nicole had a different idea. Her team infiltrated the building at night. But instead of destroying the equipment, they reprogrammed it. Now every message the Zelkari sent would include a small addition. A recording of human voices singing an old Earth song called "We Shall Overcome." It was not militarily significant, but it drove the Zalkari soldiers crazy. Every time they tried to communicate, they heard human voices refusing to give up. Lieutenant Commander Alex Johnson was teaching advanced tactics to resistance fighters. In Colorado, his students were a mix of former military personnel and civilians who had learned to fight. The key, Alex explained, is to make them react instead of act. Zalkari's strategy is based on controlling the situation. But we can change that. He showed them captured Zalkari tactical manuals. The aliens had very specific responses to every type of attack. If humans did A, the Zalkari would do B. It was predictable and efficient. So what happens if we do C? Asked Maria Gonzalez, the former school teacher who had become one of the most effective resistance leaders. They have to figure out a response on their own, Alex said. And they're not very good at that? Maria's next attack proved the point. Her team surrounded a Zalkari patrol and then did something completely unexpected. They offered to trade their weapons for safe passage for wounded civilians. The Zalkari soldiers had no procedure for this situation. They spent so much time trying to decide what to do that Maria's real plan succeeded. While the aliens were distracted, other humans destroyed a nearby supply depot. Chief Engineer Sandra Lopez was working in a hidden laboratory, trying to solve humanity's biggest problem, the technology gap. Human weapons were getting better thanks to captured Zalkari equipment, but they still could not match alien firepower. Sandra had been studying the problem from a different angle. Instead of trying to make human weapons stronger, she was trying to make Zalkari weapons weaker. Every system has vulnerabilities, she told her team. We just have to find the right frequency. She had discovered that Zalkari technology relied on harmonic resonance patterns. By broadcasting specific sound frequencies, human scientists could disrupt alien equipment from a distance. The first test was against the Zalkari scout ship. Sandra's team aimed their improvised transmitter at the enemy vessel and activated it. The alien ship's weapons shut down, its shields failed, and it crashed into a mountain. It's like a computer virus, but for their hardware, Sandra explained. We can't destroy their big ships, but we can make them helpless. Steve Clark, the mechanic from Texas, had become an expert at building the transmitters. He could make one from spare radio parts and car batteries. Soon, resistance cells across Earth were using Sandra's discovery to level the playing field. War Commander Vexville received reports of the new human weapon with growing alarm. His technical officers could not explain how primitive humans had found a weakness in Zalkari technology that had worked perfectly for 1,000 years. It should not be possible, his chief scientist reported. Their understanding of harmonic resonance is crude at best. Yet it works, Vexville said grimly. What bothered him more than the new weapon was what it represented. The humans were not just fighting harder than other species. They were thinking differently. They found solutions that no other conquered race had ever considered. Captain Julie Adams commanded one of the last human battleships. Her vessel had been damaged so many times that half of it was held together with spare parts and determination. But it was still fighting. Captain, her tactical officer reported, we have 12 Zalkari ships approaching. They're demanding our surrender. Julie looked around at her crew. They were exhausted, wounded, and outnumbered. Any sane person would give up. Send them our standard reply, Julie said. The message went out to the Zalkari fleet. Come and take us. The battle that followed was brutal. Julie's ship could not win, but it could make the aliens pay. When her weapons were destroyed, she rammed a Zalkari cruiser. When her engines failed, she used the last of her power to broadcast human resistance. Songs across all frequencies, the Zalkari won the battle, but at a cost that shocked them. 12 of their ships had been damaged or destroyed by a single human vessel that should have been helpless. Sub-Commander Crixa stood in the wreckage of Julie's bridge, looking down at her body. She had died at her station, still trying to fight. Sub-Commander, one of his soldiers asked, why do they do this? Why throw their lives away for nothing? Crixa had no answer. In 300 years of military service, He had never seen anything like human determination. Meanwhile, Supreme Overlord Vexamer was making a decision that no Zelkari leader had ever faced. The conquest of Earth was taking too long and costing too much. For the first time in their history, the Zelkari Empire was going to use planet-killing weapons. War Commander Thexvol, Vexarmor said over the communication link, "You have failed to subdue this world using conventional methods. I am sending the Stellar Decimator. One way or another, the human problem will be solved." Thexvol felt something he had never experienced before: shame. The mighty Zelkari Empire was so threatened by one small world that they were willing to destroy it completely rather than conquer it. But even as the ultimate weapon approached Earth, the humans continued fighting. They had heard about the planet killer through intercepted communications. They knew their world was doomed, yet they did not surrender. Captain Jake Morrison sent out one final message to all human forces. "We always knew this might be how it ends. But we have shown the galaxy something important. We have shown them that some things are worth dying for. That is our victory." The Stellar Decimator would arrive in 2 days. Earth's time was running out, but across the galaxy, something else was beginning. The enslaved worlds that the Zelkari had conquered were receiving human broadcasts. They were learning about a species that chose death over slavery, and for the first time in centuries, some of them were beginning to remember what freedom meant. The Stellar Decimator arrived like death itself. The massive ship was longer than most human cities and carried weapons that could crack planets in half. Supreme Overlord Vexamer had come personally to end the human problem once and for all. General Frank Williams watched the monster ship through the periscope of his underground command bunker. Around him, the last leaders of Earth's military studied their final options. "How long do we have?" Williams asked. Dr. Helen Carter looked up from her calculations. "The Decimator needs 6 hours to charge its main weapon. After that, She did not need to finish. "Then we have 6 hours to show the galaxy what humans are made of," Williams said. Captain Victoria Hayes commanded the last major human fleet. 57 ships of various sizes, most of them damaged, all of them running low on ammunition. It was not much, but it was all humanity had left. "All ships, this is Hayes," she said over the communication system. "We all know what that big ship means. We're going to die today. The question is whether we die for nothing or die for something." Her fleet began moving toward the Stellar Decimator. It was suicide, but it was also the only choice that mattered. Dr. Marcus Lee was deep underground in a laboratory that had been built to survive nuclear war. He was not preparing weapons or battle plans. He was preparing something else entirely, a message. "Is the transmitter ready?" Marcus asked his team. "Yes, sir," replied his assistant, a young woman named Lucy who had been studying communications before the war. "It's powerful enough to reach every Zelkari-controlled world in this sector of the galaxy." Marcus looked at the recording equipment in front of him. For the past month, humans across Earth had been sending him videos, audio recordings, and written statements. Last words from soldiers, messages from mothers to their children, speeches from leaders who knew they would not survive the day, but most importantly, he had tactical information, everything humans had learned about fighting the Zelkari. Every weakness they had discovered, every strategy that had worked, every way to resist an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. "This is not just our final message," Marcus said. "This is our gift to every enslaved world in the galaxy." War Commander Thexvol stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human fleet approach the Stellar Decimator. The humans had to know they could not win. Their tiny ships were like insects attacking a giant. "Should we intercept them?" asked Sub-Commander Krixa. Thexvol was quiet for a moment. "No, let them come. I want to see what they will do." Captain Victoria Hayes led the desperate charge. Her ship, the Use Vengeance, had been a passenger liner before the war. Now it carried every missile the humans could find and a crew that had volunteered for certain death. "Remember," Victoria told her fleet, "we're not trying to destroy that ship. We're trying to damage it enough that every world in the galaxy will see that it can be hurt." The battle began with the Stellar Decimator's defensive systems opening fire. Human ships died in brilliant explosions, but they kept coming. For every ship destroyed, the survivors pushed closer to their target. Captain Nathan Parker's vessel was hit by 3 different weapons at once. As his ship broke apart around him, he did something that stunned the watching Zalkari. He used his ship's remaining power to ram a Stellar Decimator weapon port. The explosion was enormous. It did not destroy the planet killer, but it damaged it enough to delay the charging process by precious hours. "Why do they do this?" Krixa asked, watching another human ship sacrifice itself to damage a single weapon turret. "What do they gain?" Vexvol was beginning to understand. They are not fighting for military victory. They are fighting to send a message. That message was being received across the galaxy. On the planet Vrex, which had been enslaved by the Zalkari for 300 years, the alien inhabitants watched human broadcasts in secret. They saw humans choosing death over surrender and began to remember what their ancestors had once been like on the ocean world of Morlock. The aquatic natives who had become Zalkari slave workers heard human voices singing songs of freedom even as Earth burned. For the first time in generations, they began to dream of rebellion. Captain Victoria Hayes was still alive, though her ship was falling apart. Half her crew was dead, her weapons were gone, and the Stellar Decimator loomed above her like a metal moon. "This is Hayes to all remaining human forces," she said into her radio. "It has been an honor to serve with you. Remember what we're dying for." She turned to her pilot, a teenager named Danny who had lied about his age to join the fleet. "Take us into the main cannon, full speed." "Yes, ma'am," Danny said, tears streaming down his face. The U's vengeance accelerated toward the heart of the Stellar Decimator. Zalkari defensive fire tore through the ship, but Victoria had planned for this. Her vessel carried something special. Every nuclear weapon Earth could spare, wired to explode on impact. The explosion when the vengeance hit the Stellar Decimator was visible from Earth's surface. It did not destroy the giant ship, but it sent a shockwave through the galaxy that was felt on every enslaved world. Supreme Overlord Veximer was furious. "How is this possible? How does a primitive species damage our most powerful weapon?" His officers had no answer. The Stellar Decimator could still destroy Earth, but now every world in the galaxy had seen it bleed. Dr. Marcus Lee activated his transmitter as the last human ships died in space above. The message he sent was not just the tactical information about fighting the Zalkari. It was something more powerful, proof that the galaxy's greatest empire could be challenged. "To every enslaved world," Marcus said into the recorder, "this is Earth, we are about to die, but we want you to know something. The Zalkari can be beaten. They are not gods. They are not unstoppable. They are just another species, and like all species, they have weaknesses." His broadcast included everything: how to disrupt Zalkari technology, how to fight their ground forces, how to organize resistance networks, and most importantly, how to find the courage to never give up. On Vrex, a creature named Zalter heard the human message and felt something stir in his chest that had been sleeping for centuries. He looked at his fellow slaves and saw the same awakening in their eyes. On Morlock, an aquatic being called Reef Singer began humming a tune she had heard in the human broadcasts. Other workers joined in, and soon the underwater factories echoed. With songs of defiance across 847 enslaved worlds, the impossible happened. Species that had accepted Zalkari rule for generations began to remember what they had lost. They began to organize. They began to resist. War Commander Vexvol received the first reports with disbelief. "Uprising on Vrex? Impossible. That world has been peaceful for 3 centuries. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're getting similar reports. From 12 other worlds, the slave populations are rebelling." "Coincidence," Vexvol said. But he knew it was not true. Supreme Overlord Veximer activated the Stellar Decimator's main weapon. The charging process had been delayed by human attacks, but it was finally ready. Earth would die, and the human problem would be solved. But as the planet killer prepared to fire, something unprecedented happened across the Zalkari Empire. On world after world, the enslaved populations rose up in rebellion. They used human tactics, human strategies, and most importantly, human determination. The Zalkari Empire, which had never faced more than one rebellion at a time, suddenly found itself fighting 847 wars. Simultaneously, the beam that destroyed Earth was visible across the galaxy. The blue-green world that had defied the Zalkari Empire for 4 months vanished in a flash of terrible light, but Earth's death scream was heard on every world where thinking beings lived. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Zalkari Empire began to shake. Supreme Overlord Veximer had won his battle. But as reports of rebellions flooded in from across the galaxy, he began to realize he might have lost something much more important. He had lost the war. 6 months after Earth died, the Zalkari Empire was dying too. Supreme Overlord Veximer stood in his throne room, surrounded by reports of rebellions on every world his people had ever conquered. 847 species were fighting back, and they were using human tactics. War Commander Vexville entered the chamber, his usually perfect uniform torn and stained. He had been fighting non-stop rebellions for months. "Report," Veximer commanded. "The situation continues to deteriorate, Supreme Overlord. The rebellion on Vrex has spread to 17 neighboring systems. The aquatic slaves on Morlock have destroyed 3 orbital stations. Even the peaceful Kethmori have joined the uprising." Veximer's red eyes glowed with anger. "How is this possible? These species accepted our rule for centuries. What changed?" Vexville hesitated. "They learned from the humans, Supreme Overlord. The broadcasts from Earth taught them that resistance was possible. On the planet Vrex, Zalter had become something his species had not seen in 300 years, a freedom fighter. He stood before a crowd of his people, holding a weapon made from Zalkari technology and human ingenuity. "Brothers and sisters," Zalter said, "the humans are gone, but their message lives on. They showed us that death is better than slavery. They showed us that some things are worth any sacrifice." Behind him was a banner with words written in the human language. "Earth remembers." It had become the symbol of resistance across the galaxy. The Vrex rebels had learned well from human broadcasts. They did not try to fight the Zalkari in open battle. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, sabotage, and psychological warfare. They made the Zalkari pay for every day they remained on Vrex. Admiral Rebecca Wright would have been proud to see what her example had inspired. She had died when Earth was destroyed, but her tactical manuals had been included in Dr. Marcus Lee's final broadcast. Now, former slaves across the galaxy were using her strategies to defeat their oppressors. On the ocean world of Morlock, Reefsinger led underwater raids against Zalkari facilities. Her people had been forced to work in underwater mines for generations. Now they turned those same tunnels into weapons, flooding Zalkari bases and destroying equipment from below. "The humans taught us something important," Reefsinger told her fellow rebels as they prepared for another attack. "The strong always think the weak will stay weak. But weakness can become strength when it refuses to give up." Dr. Karen Foster had died with Earth, but her research into Zalkari technology lived on. Her discoveries about harmonic disruption had been shared with every rebellious world. Now the galaxy was full of improvised weapons that could shut down Zalkari ships and equipment. Subcommander Krixa found himself fighting battles he could not understand. The rebels did not follow military logic. They attacked when defeat was certain, sacrificed valuable resources for minor victories, and seemed to grow stronger with every loss. "They fight like the humans did," he reported to Vexville. "Death does not frighten them. Defeat does not stop them." Captain Julie Adams had also died with Earth, but her final act of defiance had been broadcast across the galaxy. Now, when rebel ships were about to be destroyed, their captains followed her example. They rammed Zalkari vessels, sang human songs over open communications, and refused to surrender even when surrounded. War Commander Vexville realized that his empire was facing something it had never encountered before, an idea that could not be killed with weapons. The human concept of fighting for freedom had spread like a virus through every enslaved population. On the industrial world of Kef, a species of insect-like beings had built Zalkari weapons for 200 years. Now they were building weapons for themselves, using human designs modified for their unique abilities. Their leader, a being called Hivemind Tertiary, had never spoken to a Zalkari without permission. Now it broadcasts defiance across the planet. We have learned from the human example. We choose death over chains. We choose freedom over safety. Supreme Overlord Vexamer made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. He ordered a general retreat from rebellious worlds. The cost of maintaining control was becoming too high. We will abandon the outer colonies, he announced to his generals. Consolidate our forces around the core worlds. But even that was not enough. The rebellion continued to spread. Species that had never communicated with each other were sharing human tactics and coordinate attacks. The Zalkari Empire, which had ruled through fear and superior technology, found itself fighting an enemy that could not be intimidated or outgunned. The desire for freedom. Captain Jake Morrison would never know that his final message had reached the far corners of the galaxy. His words, "We fight not because we can win, but because it is right," had become a rallying cry for every enslaved world on the desert planet of Shan, lizard-like beings who had been Zalkari slaves for 400 years heard Jake's message and began their own rebellion. Their leader, a warrior named Sandwalker, spoke words that would have made any human proud. "The Star Warriors from the Blue World have shown us the path. We may die, but our children will be free." War Commander Thexville stood in his command center, surrounded by tactical displays showing rebellions on hundreds of worlds. For the first time in his life, he began to question everything he had believed about the Zalkari way of life. "Sub-Commander Krixa," he said quietly, "what if we have been wrong? What if conquest is not the natural order?" Krixa looked shocked. "Sir? The humans did something we thought was impossible. They made defeat into victory. They lost their world but freed the galaxy." The final blow to the Zalkari Empire came from an unexpected source. The Kethmori had been model slaves for 500 years. They were peaceful, intelligent, and had never shown any sign of rebellion. They built Zalkari computers, managed Zalkari databases, and knew every secret of the Empire. When they joined the rebellion, they did not attack with weapons. They attacked with information. The Kethmori leader, known as Wisdom Keeper Prime, sent a message to every enslaved world in the galaxy. "We have access to all Zalkari military codes, supply routes, and strategic plans. The humans taught us that information is the greatest weapon. Use it well." Within days, rebel forces across the galaxy had detailed maps of Zalkari positions, knew when supply ships would arrive, and could predict enemy movements. The technological advantage that had kept the Zalkari in power for 1,000 years was gone. Supreme Overlord Vexamer received his final report as ruler of the galaxy. The Zalkari Empire was collapsing on all fronts. His species, which had never known defeat, was facing extinction. "What are your orders, Supreme Overlord?" asked War Commander Thexville. Vexamer was quiet for a long time. Finally he spoke. "Send a message to all rebel worlds. The Zalkari Empire... surrenders." It was the first time those words had ever been spoken in Zalkari history. The war was over, but the victory belonged not to any single species but to an idea. The idea that some things are worth dying for. The idea that freedom is more important than safety. The idea that the strong do not always win when the weak refuse to give up. On 1,000 worlds, former slaves celebrated their freedom. They built monuments to the humans who had died to show them the way. They taught their children the songs that had been broadcast from Earth. They remembered the blue world that had chosen death over surrender. Captain Jake Morrison's final message had said that humanity's victory would not be measured in battles won, but in the inspiration they provided to others. As the galaxy began to rebuild itself as a community of free worlds rather than an empire of slaves, it was clear that humanity had achieved the greatest victory of all. They had lost their lives but saved their souls. They had lost their world but freed the galaxy. In the ruins of what had once been Earth's orbit, A small probe continued broadcasting. It carried one final message from humanity, repeating endlessly among the stars. This is Earth. We were here. We were free, and because we lived, you can be free too. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson humans could teach. Some things truly cannot be conquered, and the human spirit was one of them.